Hello, everyone, and thanks for listening to the Quality Hub, Chatting with ISO Experts. I'm your host, Xavier Francis, and today I'm here with Brian Smith, Director of Consulting Services, and Joe Hill, consultant, both from here at Core. Glad you guys could both be with us.
Good to be here.
Good to be here as well.
Awesome. Glad to have you both here. Now, this week's podcast, we're going to be talking about ISO 9001, Clause 7.1.5, calibration in your QMS. But before we dig into that, let's first learn a little bit about our guest. We'll start with Brian, who's been here a few times, and Joe has also been here. So, Brian, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Like you said, I'm the Director of Consulting here at Core. Have about 20 years of manufacturing experience and have set up calibration systems and programs and helped a lot of our clients get theirs set up with using our product and not using our product.
Okay, great. Yeah, 20 years in manufacturing. I can imagine you've calibrated a few things. Joe, what about you?
Well, similarly, I have over 20 years of experience in the certification world, so offering certifications. So, yeah, I've kind of been around the block a few times with regard to how these standards are interpreted with regard to calibration.
All right. Well, that's great. So to get this started today, I'm going to read Clause 7.1.5.1 and .2, and then we'll cover some questions after that. So, monitoring and measuring resources. The organization shall determine and provide the resources needed to ensure valid and reliable results when monitoring and measuring is used to verify the conformity of products and services to requirements. The organization shall ensure that the resources provided, A, are suitable for specific type of monitoring and measuring activities being undertaken, B, are maintained to ensure their continuing fitness for their purpose. The organization shall retain appropriate documented information as evidence of fitness for purposes of the monitoring and measuring resources. And then 7.1.5.2 says measurement traceability. When measurement traceability is a requirement or is considered by the organization to be an essential part of providing confidence in the validity of measurement results, measuring equipment shall be A, calibrated or verified, or both, at specified intervals or prior to use against measurement standards traceable to international or national measurement standards. When no such standard exists, the basis used for calibration or verification shall be retained as documented information. B, identified in order to determine their status, and C, safeguarded from adjustments, damage, or deterioration that would invalidate the calibration status and subsequent measurement results. Okay, now that everybody's tuned out on that information, Joe, what does that mean?
Well, generally speaking, if an organization uses any tools or equipment to monitor or measure anything related to the form, fit, function, or any other specified requirements of a given product or service, then they are required to ensure that those tools and or equipment that they're using are suitable for the monitoring or measuring that's being conducted, and that ultimately they're providing accurate results.
So to make sure your calipers are measuring accurately.
Exactly.
Okay. So Brian, what are the requirements for selecting measurement equipment?
Well, anytime the validity of the measurement has an impact on product quality or customer satisfaction.
Can you give us some examples?
Well, in the verbiage of the standard, it does keep it pretty vague, and they did that for a reason. So it does fall on us to determine which of the instruments or measuring devices need to fall under the definition that Joe gave. So a couple factors. First of all, if your customer specifically requires it, then that's a no-brainer whether you agree with it or not. And the criticality of the measurement to customer satisfaction or internal quality, also, you want to make sure you have an accurate reading or an accurate measurement. Now, it's not practical to calibrate every single device in your factory.
Okay.
And that turns a lot of people off to this. So if you are working early in your process, you are assuming the risk. Okay. So if we're doing process one in the 7-process event or whatever, and that measurement is getting measured again and again for form, fit, and function, it will, process number 5 won't work if process number 1 wasn't right. You're assuming the risk there. So you have to decide, look, I don't want to have everything calibrated at process 1 and 2 because we're going to catch it at process 5, and it's going to be cheap for us. If we do have a mistake at process 1 or 2, it's not going to be that expensive in time or material. But if it is, then you want to be more stringent with your calibration early in the process. And I've seen both. Generally, when you're working with raw material in the beginning, you are using tape measures and rulers and things like that because it's just not that critical yet, because there's going to be a lot more machining going on after that.
Mm-hmm.
But if an early mistake could cost you dearly, then you want to have calibrated instruments early. And, the other thing comes in, I always use an example of an egg processing facility. Any mistake in temperature is going to be devastating. Could be the potential. And, the obvious thing is someone could get sick. But if you find one of your thermometers is out of calibration, you automatically have to shut down and recall everything that went past that. So early, often, double. I mean, that's, if we're making steel balls, it's one thing. If you're producing eggs, so you can calibrate your calibration program by the criticality of the measurement. And that's external risk and internal risk.
I have another potential aspect that
Okay.
could play into what Brian was saying.
Okay.
You have to factor in what it is the customer is providing. You have a lot of customers that might be involved with multiple assembly processes. So there may be things in assembly process 1 that by the time you get to assembly process 2 or 3, it gets covered or buried.
Okay.
So there might be things in assembly process 1 that you need to verify and validate or measure before you move on. Because again, that assembly process, there might be things that are added or stacked.
The hole's been used.
Yeah, exactly.
That makes sense. Okay, Joe, what must be done if a measuring device is found to be out of calibration?
Well, the standard does speak to that. It requires organizations to essentially determine the validity of any previous measurement results if or when measuring equipment is found to be out of calibration or unfit for its purpose.
Okay.
So if a piece of measuring equipment is found to be out of calibration or tolerance, the organization should have a method to look back at any other product and or service that may have been measured using that specific tool or equipment since its last calibration date.
Okay.
That's why it's important to consider and define an adequate calibration frequency, and also consider implementing methods for validating measuring equipment in between formal calibrations.
Okay.
Because that can essentially minimize how far back you would need to look back at previous measurement results.
Gotcha. And that sounds like a good idea as well.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
It can get expensive.
Oh, yes.
And,
I bet.
And it can be bad. Like, using the example of the eggs, I'm sure there's some kind of FDA requirement, but you would want multiple thermometers and very, very close progression. You don't want more than a couple of minutes going by that something that we can't prove that those eggs were at a certain temperature.
Right. Constantly.
Yep.
Now, might that be something that a customer asks in their requirements? We need to have the validity of the temperature checked.
Yeah. If it's a customer requirement or a regulatory requirement, it's usually pretty detailed.
Okay.
Like they may even provide the equipment, right, to that level. But yeah, it'll be very specific.
Okay. So you're going to make sure you meet any regulatory as well as customer requirements at that point.
And there may be cases where during that process, if you find something to be out of tolerance or out of calibration, you may need to reach out to one of your customers where product has already been shipped out.
Gotcha.
And saying, hey,
we had a deviation.
Exactly. Exactly.
Gotcha.
And that's what I was kind of talking about. As you get to the end of the process, you want to be more frequent with your measurements and make sure that things are calibrated at the end.
Gotcha.
Because that's expensive and embarrassing when you got to do a recall. Yep.
And could be litigation if it's something. Somebody gets sick from E. coli because you didn't measure things right. All right. So, Brian, what information should be included in calibration records?
All right. So we need to know who did the calibration.
Okay.
What standard was used. You had talked about the methodology has to be traceable to a national or international standard. 99.9% of the time it's NIST.
Okay.
So you want to have that document on what standard you used and how it's traceable. What the results were of that calibration, You want to be able to go back and look at that.
Mm-hmm.
When it was done, when it's due again
Okay.
for calibration. And then the biggest thing is what was done if it was found out of tolerance.
Okay.
So you need to take action.
So let me give you a hypothetical here. What was done when it was found out of tolerance? Let's say it is a thermometer. I am not an expert on thermometers, but I'm assuming you would just toss it. Do you have to if you put another one in its replacement, does that stay in the same record? Or do you say that was discarded and we put another one in?
All right. So,
or is that too broad of a question right now?
No, but it's multi-leveled.
Okay.
So Joe's over there laughing because he knows. All right. So let's take the first part of that. Not what you did with the instrument that was out of calibration. That's disposition.
Okay.
Okay. But what corrective action or what investigation took place because that was found out of tolerance?
And that would be in the calibration records?
Yes.
Okay.
Once you find something out of tolerance, then
that just starts the whole
the price of poker
all
just
the check
went
marks.
up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, if set it up properly, hopefully minimal. Let's go back to the egg factory.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have to do anything because we had 2 other calibrated thermometers right there beside it, and those 2 were checked,
Mm-hmm.
and they weren't due, but they were checked at that time, and both are found to be in tolerance. So we disposed of the bad one and put a new one in its place, calibrated it.
That would cause a new record to happen for that device is what I'm asking. Replacement versus.
Let me think about how I want to put this.
Okay.
All right, so let's use that thermometer as an example.
Mm-hmm.
If the position of the thermometer is what we are tracking, thermometer 1, you would want to know what the serial number of the thermometer that's sitting in that place is. So you could continue that record, and your action could be to dispose of serial number XYZ, and serial number ZYX was put in its place.
Gotcha.
If you're tracking it by the serial number, then that thing's disposed of. That record can be stopped, documented, and a new one can be started with the serial number of the thermometer that's taken its place.
That's interesting.
With note.
So it's not only the device, it's also maybe its placement or use.
Yes.
All right. That's great. So are all these required, and what is often done when something's out of tolerance? Let's say it's not a thermometer. Let's say it's something that can be adjusted.
Well, again, the impact has to be taken into account. Again, if we're in process, let's just say we're in a factory, and very early in the process, one of our devices is found to be out of tolerance. You just go down the line. Generally, that measurement is going to be confirmed.
Okay.
We have that measurement in place to save us money,
Mm-hmm.
because if it gets to level 5 and it's found to be wrong, it's going to be costly for us.
Gotcha.
Most processors are set up to have catches down the line. So you would only need to go down the line and confirm the next checkpoint.
Gotcha.
And anything in between there, you'd want to go back and remeasure that so it doesn't cost you.
Gotcha.
But if it got out of our control towards the customer, and it's going to get expensive.
Right.
And the worst thing is you're talking about a recall.
What about the device itself? If it's found out of tolerance?
Well, like I think you mentioned it, if it can be adjusted, that's disposition.
Okay.
So it can be readjusted, recalibrated, and used.
Okay.
If it can't, then the disposition would be eliminate that instrument.
Okay. Joe, how long must calibration records be retained, and how does one maintain and store calibration certificates?
So the standard itself doesn't really dictate how long records need to be maintained, so it's really up to the individual organization. A fairly standard retention rate is approximately 7 years for most records, but keep in mind that some customers may have specific requirements related to how long certain records are retained. Personally,
Gotcha.
I generally take a conservative approach and recommend that records are retained for the life of the tool or the piece of equipment. As far as storing or maintaining records, there's lots of different ways. Many organizations will create a folder in their network specifically for storing calibration records electronically. The core compliance platform has its own built-in tools and methods for documenting and retaining calibration records.
I know it can even give you, okay, it's time to check it again, reminders,
Due
and things
dates,
like that,
yeah.
due dates, the whole cycle.
Yep. I still work with some organizations that choose to maintain hard copies in binders, which is also acceptable from the standards viewpoint. And there's also external calibration houses, and some of those calibration providers will keep calibration records on their website, and they'll have designated customer access to those records. So their customer can log into their website and they'll have a log of all their recent calibrations, calibration records. And so they'll just go to the provider site to access the calibration information as well.
Okay.
So lots of different ways.
Lots of different ways.
Yeah.
Core's one of them. Can help you keep track of it, like we said, when they're doing things like that.
Let me just say a little bit about what Joe just said.
All right.
There are a lot of places that keep their records still in hard copy. We want to get away from that. And if nothing else, to make it easier on yourself come audit time. Because there's nothing worse than having to rifle through a folder, grease covered, and when an auditor's looking over your shoulder.
Yeah.
And nowadays you want to use some kind of electronic format. And there's expensive ones out there. But the nice thing about Cores is it comes with your package. You don't pay extra for it.
Right.
And it really makes it a lot easier to produce the record, because you go to basically the tool's homepage and all the records all the way back are sitting right there for you to click on and show an auditor.
And if it is something that you got in a hard copy, you can scan it, upload it, so the document will be right there accessible, even if it wasn't something that was sent to you digitally or done digitally.
That's true. A hard copy, like I have one of my customers that has their scales done externally, and that company sends us a certificate and we upload that into the calibration record in Core, so it's right there.
Right.
But we also fill out the disposition.
Oh, absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah. I'm just saying that you can have a link like right there in the same exact form that says, oh, it was calibrated on this date. Oh, maybe that's why you save that particular document. Certification 5/5/2015, boom, there it is.
Yeah. Our software is pretty comprehensive. And again, it's not extra. And calibration software can get expensive.
This ends part 1 of Calibration in your QMS, Clause 7.1.5. Please tune in next week for part 2, where we'll continue on with Brian and Joe. And we want to thank everyone who's listened to our podcast today. We hope it's been informative for you. Now, if you're looking for more information about Core Business Solutions and how we can help you with ISO certification, cybersecurity, customized training, maybe help you with calibrating and other things, please email us at info@thecoresolution.com. You can also visit our website at www.thecoresolution.com. And if you haven't already followed us on your favorite podcast platform or YouTube, be sure to do so. That way you won't miss the next Quality Hub podcast when it's released next week. Have a great day.